The night air in the city was colder than usual. A thin mist drifted along the quiet streets as luxury cars glided past the dimly lit sidewalks. Inside one of them sat Mr. Walker, a man whose name carried weight in every business circle in the country. He was the kind of man who could sign a document and make a fortune move, yet behind his calm face hid years of exhaustion and silence. Beside him sat his son, Ethan, 12 years old, fragile, and confined to a wheelchair since birth. Mr. Walker's life had become a routine of wealth without warmth. His mansion echoed with success but not laughter. Every doctor had failed him, every hope of seeing his son walk had been crushed. Over time, he built walls around his heart. To him, kindness was a luxury he could not afford. That night, as the driver stopped at a red light, a faint tapping sound came from the window. Mr. Walker looked up sharply. A small boy stood there, his hands trembling as he held a basket of old bread. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with dust, and his eyes, those eyes, were both pleading and pure. "Please, sir," the boy said softly, his voice barely reaching through the glass, "would you like to buy some bread?" Mr. Walker frowned. "Drive on," he said coldly. But before the driver could move, Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, wait," he said. "He looks hungry. Can we help him?" Mr. Walker hesitated. For reasons he didn't understand, he couldn't say no to his son. With a sigh, he rolled down the window and gestured for the boy to come closer. "Here," he said, handing the driver some cash. "Take this, and get something to eat." The boy looked at the money, then at Mr. Walker. He didn't take it. Instead, he whispered something that made the air inside the car grow still. "Please tell your dad to feed me himself," he said, his small voice trembling. "And I will make you walk." Ethan's eyes widened. Mr. Walker froze, unable to process what he'd just heard. The traffic light turned green, but no one moved. For a moment, it felt like the whole city had gone silent. What would you have done if a starving child said those words to you? Would you laugh, ignore him, or step out of the car? Before we go deeper into this heart-touching story, make sure to subscribe so you never miss more stories that remind us of the power of kindness. The car ride home was silent. Mr. Walker stared out of the window, his reflection fading against the passing lights. The boy's words echoed in his mind like a strange melody that refused to fade. "Feed me yourself, and I will make you walk." It sounded absurd, yet something about it unsettled him. Ethan, sitting quietly in the back seat, kept glancing at his father. "Dad," he said finally, "what do you think he meant?" Mr. Walker shook his head. "Nonsense, Ethan. Just a poor boy looking for attention." But the look in his eyes said otherwise. For the first time in years, Mr. Walker had felt something he couldn't explain. A pull, a stirring of emotion buried deep beneath his hardened heart. Back at the mansion, the world seemed as it always did. Silent hallways, ticking clocks, and servants moving like shadows. Ethan's laughter used to fill the rooms when he was younger, but as he grew older and his condition remained unchanged, even his smile began to fade. Mr. Walker spent most of his nights buried in work. Contracts, numbers, deals, those were the things he understood. Yet, behind his success was loneliness he would never admit. Every time he saw his son's wheelchair, guilt pricked him like a needle. Maybe if he had been a better father, a better man, things would have been different. Downstairs, the staff whispered. They said their boss had everything except happiness. And maybe they were right. The next morning, Ethan wheeled himself into the dining room. His plate was full, but he barely touched his food. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think that boy was telling the truth?" Mr. Walker sighed. "Ethan, miracles don't happen just because someone says something strange. People like him, they survive on stories." "But maybe," Ethan whispered, "some stories are true." Mr. Walker looked at his son, the words stinging more than he expected. He couldn't shake the image of that frail child, those trembling hands holding bread. Later that day, as he stood by his office window overlooking the city, he wondered how many children were out there, hungry, waiting, forgotten. It was an uncomfortable thought for a man used to ignoring such things. That night, Ethan dreamed of the boy. He saw him standing by the road again, but this time he wasn't selling bread. He was smiling, holding out a hand toward him. When Ethan woke, tears had rolled down his cheeks. In the following days, the house felt heavier. Ethan spoke less, ate less. Mr. Walker noticed, but didn't know how to reach him. Every attempt to cheer him up felt hollow. He couldn't buy his son happiness. Have you ever seen someone silently struggling like this? Someone you love, hurting in ways you can't fix? What would you do if all your money couldn't heal the person you care about most? The weight of silence grew unbearable. And then one evening, as rain poured outside and thunder rolled across the sky, Ethan asked quietly, "Dad, can we go find him?" Mr. Walker froze. "Find who?" "The boy," Ethan said. "The one who said he could make me walk." Mr. Walker looked at his son's hopeful face and, for once, couldn't say no. That night, he made a promise that would lead him down a road where faith and kindness would test everything he believed. 2 days later, the rain had not stopped. The sky was a dull gray, and the streets shimmered with puddles that reflected the city lights. Mr. Walker sat in the back seat of his car again, this time not for business, but for a search he didn't fully understand. Ethan was beside him, his small hands gripping the edge of his wheelchair with quiet determination. They drove through the poorer part of the city, where narrow alleys replaced wide boulevards and laughter was a rare sound. Mr. Walker lowered the tinted window slightly, glancing at the faces that passed: children running barefoot, women huddled near fires, men pushing carts through the mud. He felt a weight he hadn't felt before, an awareness of how different his world was from theirs. "Dad," Ethan whispered, "what if we don't find him?" "We'll keep trying," Mr. Walker said, his tone softening. "Sometimes, finding answers takes time." The driver slowed near an old marketplace. The stalls were nearly empty, and only a few vendors remained under torn umbrellas. Mr. Walker stepped out, the rain soaking his coat instantly. "We're looking for a boy," he said to a vendor, small, maybe 10 years old, "sells bread around here." The woman shook her head. "Too many like him, sir." They searched for hours, one street after another, until Ethan's voice trembled from exhaustion. "Dad, maybe he's gone." But just as Mr. Walker was about to give up, a familiar voice called out, "Sir." They turned. Standing under a broken awning was the same boy. His face lit up with a smile that seemed too bright for such a dark place. He still held the basket of bread, now nearly empty. Ethan's eyes widened. "It's him." The boy approached slowly, the rain running down his face. "You came back," he said softly. Mr. Walker swallowed hard. "Yes. My son wanted to see you again." The boy nodded and looked at Ethan. "Do your legs still hurt?" Ethan hesitated. "A little," he said. "But, that night, I felt something. Like my legs wanted to move." The boy smiled faintly. "Then maybe they still can." There was something strange about his calmness, something beyond his age. He didn't speak like a child begging for help, he spoke like someone who already knew the answer. Mr. Walker asked carefully, "Who are you? Where are your parents?" The boy looked away. "My mother is gone. My father works far away. I sell bread so I can eat." He paused, then added, "But I also try to help people who forget how to believe." Mr. Walker frowned. "Believe in what?" The boy looked up at him and said, "In kindness." The words struck like lightning, simple, yet powerful. Would you have trusted a stranger in this situation? Would you believe a child who spoke with such quiet certainty? Ethan reached out his hand. "What's your name?" "Gabriel," the boy replied. "But people just call me the bread boy." "Gabriel," Ethan repeated with a smile. "That's a nice name." Mr. Walker studied him closely. Something about this boy felt almost unreal. Maybe it was the way his eyes glowed in the fading light, or the calmness in his voice despite the storm. "Come," Mr. Walker said suddenly. "Let me buy you a proper meal." Gabriel hesitated. "I told you, sir," he said gently. "You must feed me yourself." Mr. Walker blinked, remembering those exact words. Ethan looked up at him eagerly. "Dad, maybe this time you should." Mr. Walker took a slow breath and nodded. "All right." They walked to a small roadside eatery, its single lantern flickering. Inside, the smell of soup filled the air. Mr. Walker ordered 3 bowls and sat down beside his son and Gabriel. For the first time in years, he served someone other than himself, spooning soup into the boy's bowl, placing bread on his plate. Gabriel smiled, whispering, "Thank you, sir. You have no idea what you've just done." Mr. Walker frowned slightly. What do you mean? But Gabriel only looked at Ethan and said softly, you'll see. And in that quiet moment, something shifted, like the world itself had paused to breathe. Do you believe every act of kindness comes with a reason? Outside, the rain began to ease. Inside, three souls shared a meal that would soon change their lives forever. The warmth of the small eatery wrapped around them like a blanket. Outside, the storm finally broke apart, leaving only the sound of gentle raindrops. Mr. Walker watched Gabriel eat slowly, savoring every bite as though it were a feast. Ethan sat beside him, smiling for the first time in weeks. When the meal was done, Gabriel folded his hands together and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Then he turned toward Ethan. Can I touch your legs again? He asked softly. Mr. Walker hesitated. His instinct was to say no, he'd spent too many years fighting false hope, but Ethan nodded eagerly. Please, Dad, let him. Mr. Walker gave a slow, uncertain nod. Gabriel knelt in front of Ethan's wheelchair. His small hands trembled as he placed them gently on Ethan's knees. The boy closed his eyes and whispered something under his breath, words neither of them could quite hear. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Ethan gasped. A strange warmth spread through his legs, followed by a sharp tingling, like life awakening after a deep sleep. His hands clutched the sides of the chair. Dad, I can feel them, he whispered. I can feel my legs. Mr. Walker's eyes widened. Ethan, are you sure? Ethan nodded frantically. Yes, I can move my foot. He looked down in disbelief as his toes shifted ever so slightly. Mr. Walker dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The eatery owner stopped mid-step, staring in awe. Gabriel smiled faintly but said nothing. He simply stood, placed his small hand on Mr. Walker's shoulder, and whispered, Now you see what happens when kindness is shared, not bought. Mr. Walker tried to speak, but his voice broke. Who are you really? Gabriel shook his head. It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that your heart is open again. The man couldn't stop crying. In that tiny restaurant, surrounded by the smell of soup and the hum of rain, something sacred had happened, something beyond reason. A few minutes later, Ethan stood up, his legs shaking under him. Mr. Walker reached out in disbelief. Son, you're standing. Ethan took a slow step forward, unsteady but determined. The tears in his eyes mixed with laughter as he fell into his father's arms. Dad, I'm walking. Mr. Walker held him tightly, unable to speak. People outside began to gather, peering through the windows. To them, it was a miracle. Ethan looked at Gabriel, smiling through tears. You did this. Thank you. But Gabriel shook his head. No, Ethan. You did it. Because you believed. Mr. Walker wiped his eyes and turned to Gabriel. You can't leave like this. Please, let me help you. You can come live with us. You'll never have to sell bread again. Gabriel looked away toward the rain-soaked street. My work isn't finished here, sir. There are many hearts still closed. He began to walk away, barefoot on the wet road. Ethan called out, Wait. Will I see you again? Gabriel turned and smiled, a smile filled with peace. Whenever you feed someone with love, I'll be there. The boy disappeared into the mist, leaving father and son standing together under the light rain. How would you react if someone did this for you? Would you believe it was chance, or something divine? Do you believe kindness can truly change a person's heart? Mr. Walker didn't know what to believe anymore. He only knew that everything inside him had changed. He lifted Ethan into the car with trembling hands, the boy still able to stand with help. The ride home felt different this time, the air lighter, the silence softer. For the first time in years, Mr. Walker smiled. Outside, the city lights shimmered, as though the world itself had witnessed their transformation. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the long glass windows of the Walker mansion. For years, the house had woken to silence, but today it was different. There was laughter, soft, hesitant, but real. Ethan stood in the middle of his room, one hand holding the side of his wheelchair, the other stretching toward his father. He wasn't walking freely yet, but every step was a small miracle. Mr. Walker stood nearby, hardly daring to breathe. Each step his son took felt like a lifetime of prayers finally answered. He didn't understand how it happened, but he didn't need to. All he knew was that it started with one simple act: feeding a hungry boy. "Dad," Ethan said, smiling, "I want to find him again. I want to thank him properly." Mr. Walker nodded, his voice thick. "We will, son. I promise." Over the next few days, their lives began to change in quiet, profound ways. Mr. Walker found himself doing things he hadn't done in years: visiting hospitals, donating to shelters, talking kindly to the staff. He noticed people's eyes when he spoke to them, not just their names or their jobs. Everywhere he went, he kept looking for Gabriel, the mysterious bread boy, but the boy was nowhere to be found. Some said they had seen a child who looked like him near the old market, others said he had left town. One evening, Mr. Walker stood by the window of his study, watching the city lights below. His reflection stared back at him, the reflection of a man no longer defined by power, but by humility. Ethan wheeled into the room, holding a drawing. It was a sketch of Gabriel, drawn from memory. "Do you think he was an angel?" the boy asked. Mr. Walker smiled faintly. "Maybe he was. Or maybe God sometimes uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things." Ethan nodded. "Then I want to be like him." Mr. Walker's heart swelled. "You already are, son." From that day, they started something new together, a small foundation that provided food and support for children on the streets. Ethan named it the Bread of Hope. Every meal they served carried a quiet reminder of the boy who had changed their lives. People began to notice the change in Mr. Walker. The once cold and distant businessman now smiled at strangers, visited schools, and offered help without cameras or headlines. His kindness rippled through the community like light spreading through a dark room. One afternoon, while serving food at a shelter, a little girl tugged at his sleeve. "Sir," she asked, "why do you help us?" Mr. Walker looked at her with a gentle smile. "Because someone once helped me remember what kindness feels like." The girl grinned and ran off with her meal, and for a moment, he thought he saw a boy standing near the doorway, barefoot, holding a basket of bread. But when he blinked, the image was gone. He turned to Ethan and said softly, "He's still with us, isn't he?" Ethan nodded. "Always." "What lesson are you taking from this moment? Do you believe that even one small act can ripple across lives and change hearts? Who in your life deserves to hear this message today?" That night, as father and son sat in the garden watching the stars, Mr. Walker whispered, "Thank you, Gabriel, wherever you are." And somewhere, carried by the wind, it felt as if a quiet voice whispered back, "Thank you for remembering." Weeks passed, and the story of Ethan Walker's recovery began to spread quietly through the city. Doctors were puzzled, reporters curious, but the Walkers gave no interviews. For them, the real miracle wasn't only that Ethan could now walk, it was that their hearts had been healed. Mr. Walker no longer cared for newspaper headlines or business awards. His new joy came from the laughter echoing through the halls of his mansion, and the simple sight of his son walking beside him in the garden each morning. Every weekend, they returned to the same neighborhood where they had first met Gabriel. The once empty corner by the old marketplace was now home to a small soup kitchen called the Bread of Hope. Volunteers filled the air with chatter and the smell of warm meals. Mr. Walker moved among them quietly, serving soup, handing out loaves of bread, and greeting everyone with a smile that surprised even himself. Children who used to beg now lined up with joy in their eyes. Ethan helped hand out food, laughing and talking as if he'd been doing it his whole life. And every time they finished serving, Mr. Walker would place one loaf aside, a silent gesture, just in case Gabriel ever returned. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Mr. Walker stood watching the last few people leave the shelter. The city lights began to twinkle, and for a moment, he thought he saw a familiar figure standing at the far end of the street, a young boy with a basket smiling. Then, just as quickly, the vision faded into the crowd. Maybe it was real. Maybe it wasn't. But Mr. Walker didn't need proof anymore. He had learned the truth. Kindness was its own miracle. He turned to Ethan, who was locking the shelter door. "You know," he said, "I used to believe money could fix everything. But now I know, it's love that heals." Ethan smiled. "And kindness that keeps love alive." Mr. Walker nodded slowly. "Yes. One meal, one heart at a time." They walked together toward the car, side by side, father and son, the businessman and the boy who had once prayed for a miracle. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter down the street. Somewhere, perhaps unseen, Gabriel was smiling too. Sometimes, the smallest act of love can heal wounds that time never could. Sometimes, it takes the innocence of a hungry child to remind a grown man how to feed the world with his heart. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove kindness still exists.